Hi, my name is Sarai Cook. I am a formerly incarcerated woman and mother. I'm also an attorney licensed to practice law in both Washington State and Oklahoma. I'm currently leading an organization called the National Trauma Awareness Initiative. One of our many efforts is to change the way people think about people that have experienced incarceration. Many people that experience incarceration have been victims long before they get entangled in the criminal justice system. These interviews that I'm doing are with individuals that have lived the experience of incarceration. Today, I'll be interviewing Jeremiah Bourgeois, and I'll let Jeremiah introduce himself.
Uh, I'm Jeremiah. I go by JJ. And in 1992, I became one of the youngest children in Washington State to receive a life without parole sentence. And I spent 27 years in prison before being released due to a U.S. Supreme Court decision. And I've now been free for almost 2 years. I'm still in the grips of reentry. I'm a law student at Gonzaga University, and I'm the director of the Beyond the Blindfold of Justice project.
Thank you. So before we get started with our interview, I'm going to share my understanding of what trauma is. And we've already discussed this, basically our shared understanding of what trauma is. And I'll let you add anything. So individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And today we're going to discuss incarceration, reentry, recidivism, and trauma. So before I get started with your story, I'd like to just share a little bit about my story of reentry. I got out of prison in 2005. I was 25 years old at the time. When I got out, I had my GED. I had my GED. I had dropped out of school in the seventh grade and went back, a little bit while I was in and out of incarceration as a juvenile, and I went to one semester of high school. But basically, when I got out of prison, I had no education. I didn't really have any job skills. I had learned some job skills in prison. I had learned a little bit about welding. I had forced myself to become a good typist. Um, so when I got out, I was applying for food stamps at a place called Central City Concern. And somebody I had been in prison with told me there was an opening for a receptionist job there. So I ended up getting that job. And I also got another job because I was a part-time job, another part-time job at a car dealership. When I got out, I went into an Oxford house. It's a clean and sober living home. And I was able to stay sober off alcohol because I'm an alcoholic. I was able to stay sober for 6 months. That that Oxford house, I was living in the basement, and I had a lamp. It was one of those lamps that go up like this,
Yeah.
and it was by a curtain. So I walked down in my room one day, and the whole side of the wall was on fire. So my Oxford house burnt down. All my clothes burnt. All
Oh
my pictures.
gosh.
This is about 6 months after I got out of prison, so I had no clothes. I had Red Cross gave me some money to buy some clothes for work. So it was it. I'll say it was definitely rough, and
It
I'm
was
not going to go
trauma.
in. Yeah, it's just more trauma, right? It's just more trauma and more. So after that event, actually, I started drinking again, and I was drinking I had a boyfriend at the time paid for an apartment for me, but I paid the rent every month, but he helped me to get into it, and I was really struggling making $10.50 an hour, and it was like a luxury to go to McDonald's. Basically, I was trying to get custody of my daughter back, um, but I was also struggling at work. Uh, I have a lot of unresolved trauma. I have a 9 out of the 13 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Um, so I have a lot of, and I had a criminal, a prison mentality, even though, I was only in there for a year, but I had spent all my teen years incarcerated. So, I felt disrespected all the time and I didn't want to listen. I wanted to do things my way, which looking back, actually, my way is pretty efficient. I am an efficient person.
You were on to something with that.
Yeah. And I just kind of thought, oh, well, but here's what I know, not everybody wants to do everything the efficient way. But my 25-year-old self didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, I really struggled, and I there were some times that I could have gotten back into my old lifestyle. And there was a specific time, I won't tell the story, but where I came that close to getting back into the lifestyle that I was living. And I didn't. And right after that, when I didn't do that, came about a situation where I was able to get into low income housing. And I was able to be enrolled in school and sustain myself through school loans and school grants and low income housing and food stamps and medical from the state. Um, but from that 2005 until recently, that's 16 years. Yes, I was not, I didn't go back to prison, but I still was in a prison in my own mind, and I still sort of am, because I still have a lot of unresolved trauma that I'm working through. I still was repeating a lot of dysfunctional cycles. And when I remember being in law school and lawyers would come in and talk to us and like, oh, they must have no problems. They must know how to solve all their problems immediately because they're so smart. And then I became one, and I was like, no, there's lots of problems. There's lots of responsibilities. There's lots
Yeah.
of we're just people. And so I've struggled all this time um, with, I'll move constantly. I'll change jobs constantly. No real stability. So I guess, with that, what I'm saying is that people think about reentry and coming out of prison, but they don't think about, yes, the housing opportunity did help me. Yes, being able to access education did help me. But if I look at the big picture, all I really have, yeah, I have a law degree, I have a law license. I also have $170,000 in debt from law school. Um, I also have, you know, I don't know. It's rough. It's rough, and I actually, now that I know more about trauma, and I'm trying to even get the resources to help me now, trying to find actually a person of color that provides trauma therapy that can give me the help that I need. And I
The
have really good,
unicorn.
yeah, a person of color that can give EDMR, CBT, EDMR, ETF, like all of these trauma therapies, but then also understand where I'm coming from and my unique life experience. And I cannot find it. And I have really good insurance. And so if I can't find it, and I am an empowered person, but I have tried and given up and tried and given up because the system that's set up right now for therapy is just not there for people that have like high levels of trauma like myself. And and I can't find the help that I need. Like, it's little by little, it's coming to me. But anybody else, I think I'm an empowered person and I'm giving up.
Yeah.
think about somebody else that has all these other things to worry about. And I had a day and a half to sit down and try and get the door slammed in my face, by
Yeah.
not literally, but figuratively, by not being able to find the care that I need. Um, so I'm that's why I'm doing this, is just to kind of shed the light on what we really need when we're reentering back into society from a period of incarceration. Okay, you can give us a house, but if we have unresolved trauma, we're going to mess up that housing. We're going to mess up those job opportunities. We're going to mess up that school opportunity. We're going to mess up that job opportunity. I mean, not everybody will, but there's a high chance of that, and we will struggle, and you know what, we're survivors and fighters, so we get beat down and we get back up, and we get beat down and we get back up. But it is a struggle.
When you talk about the being empowered and not even being able to access those type of resources, it brought to mind a news story I saw last month. A guy who was a former juvenile board offender, which is what I was, where basically they changed the law to allow kids who got sentenced as adults to give them an opportunity for release. He served 20 years for a crime he committed at 17, got out, moved in with the woman who had been in his life while he was confined, and within 90 days, opened fire on her, shooting her and her young daughter. And I didn't know what to make of it at first. And then I see the interview with him sitting in jail, and he's talking about how he and his wife had tried to obtain counseling and other supports, and it just wasn't happening. And I know some people who would look at that who didn't know better and say, why didn't he just try hard enough? But I'm a law student, and I was fortunate when I got out. I did have an education. My family had the means to pay for me to take correspondence courses, and I left with a bachelor's degree. I spent years in a law library and ended up publishing several articles in law journals. I was writing a column every month for a criminal justice news site. I had a golden parachute when I left prison: money, a job, stable housing, supports. And within several months, I was violating parole to leave the county to see my family without permission. Uh, I was smoking weed and drinking. Now, granted, there was a pandemic going on, but there could have been other means available for me to try to deal with things. And I mean, even in the midst of law school, I managed to publish an article in the Seattle University School of Law's Journal of Social Justice, and the world would be shocked to know that I was on the cusp of getting addicted to cocaine and methamphetamines. And so, if the law student who has been labeled the extraordinary, ordinary prisoner, that's actually the title of a book based on the columns I wrote, if I could be doing that, yet have all the boxes checked that they say are necessary for successful reentry, that illustrates that missing piece of unresolved trauma. Because for a long time, I didn't feel anything. You would think I was doing cartwheels when I got out of a life sentence, or when I got into law school, or when I had sex for the first time as an adult. I barely felt anything, because trauma will change the wiring in your brain. I mean, the Supreme Court called my sentence a cruel and unusual punishment. Cruel and unusual equals trauma. And that was 27 years on top of adverse childhood experiences. And so there is a lot more to a successful reentry than money and a job and removing the systemic barriers when it comes to housing and employment. There are people coming out who are not only traumatized before they got in there, but they're experiencing trauma while they're in there. And until that piece is really addressed when it comes to thinking surrounding reentry, I don't think there's going to, that is, in my view, the reason why the recidivism rate seems to never change. Nobody's dealing with the trauma. It's as if stakeholders who are instrumental in producing the outcome related to whether you want to take it as retribution or rehabilitation or incapacitation, those who are controlling the levers that implement punishment, it's as if their minds can't conceive of trying to address the trauma, as if they have to take ownership for causing it. And I think it's that concept in their minds that were we to be providing some type of trauma treatments while people are in there, as opposed to just Narcotics Anonymous or uh, anger management, uh, that somehow that will open the Pandora's box of, let's really look at what's going on inside these prisons. Are they producing trauma? Is the trauma people are experiencing while confined actually increasing their likelihood to recidivate? It's as if that is almost off the table when it comes to discussions about rehabilitation or criminal justice reform. And I think it's really a scary thing, because if a man who seemingly has everything could not be happy after getting out of a life sentence and start using the drugs that people look at others on the street and just feel a sense of revulsion, like, ugh. If that guy could be starting to use those type of substances just to feel something, I mean, there's a reason that that man got out and opened fire, and he's now sitting in the Spokane County Jail facing the rest of his life in prison.
There's there's two things that came up for me in what you said. And I want to ask you, when we think of adverse childhood experiences, and you know what those are on the ACE test, adverse childhood experiences, do you have any insights on how those same adverse childhood experiences are played out within prisons and prisons and the criminal justice system, as far as the specific questions, how those are relived and how those are replayed out in that system? Do you
Well,
understand what I'm
I
saying?
do, I can just give you an illustration. One of the adverse childhood experiences I went through was abuse by my brother, my older brother, physical abuse. And it stemmed from the abuse he was receiving at the hands of my grandmother. But the way I learned to deal with that trauma was by doing absolutely nothing when I'm being physically abused or psychologically abused. But I will finally reach a point where I will make a decision like enough is enough, and my reaction will be completely nuclear. And it will be well thought out, because being the little guy who's abused, you can't just get mad and go off the cuff. You can't win like that. And that trauma led to countless people being assaulted when I was confined. None of them ever saw it coming. They thought it was all over, whatever they said or did. And I mean, from multiple correctional officers, I got additional convictions for assaulting correctional officers. I've beat prisoners with weights, thrown boiling stuff on top of people. And it all stems from I'll never let nobody play me like my brother used to when I was young. Decades of violence, all stemming from a boy who was being beat up and psychologically tormented by his brother.
And I had a, actually, I talked about that in the video where I talked about my life story. And I've disclosed to you that I have, attention ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and how that affected me in the school system, and how I felt like I was targeted all through my school system. And and what that led me to, because I felt like I was unfairly targeted, and I always was getting in trouble, and I couldn't help myself because I was just being myself. I couldn't physically just follow the rules or be quiet. I couldn't, because of all the trauma that I had at a really early age, um, and the abuse that I went through at a really early age. It made me this. I just had to move around, had energy, and had to talk. Like I couldn't stop myself. So it came to the point, like just what you're saying.
Yeah.
I said, I I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't care what anyone says or anyone thinks, because I felt so unfairly treated because of my disability that I just stopped completely caring what any person of authority thought. I didn't care if you're a teacher, a judge, a police officer, anybody, because I felt like I was being abused all those years in school and other places because of my disability. And I didn't have the words to say that. I
Yeah.
couldn't articulate it, but now I can. Um, so I understand what you're saying. The other thing that came up for me, now I can't remember. Sorry.
Well, I
Um,
have ADD also, recently diagnosed, so I get that completely. But to that point of your early years when you were dealing with school systems, for me, it was I was extremely bright. And for whatever reason, I didn't hesitate to call out BS, so to speak. If it didn't make sense, I would say it. You kids need to get out of here. Quit hanging out there. I mean, I would be the one to say, who are you? We're in a public space. What we can hang out here as long as we want. Those type of responses coming out the mouth of a child used to drive adults crazy. I mean, I've even been assaulted by people who probably never committed any felony in their life because they would be so incensed to see this little person talk to them like they're a grown man. But I mean, those experiences taught me that the arbitrariness that might makes right. I knew I was right, but I didn't have the power to actually do anything to be able to manifest that I was right. They just do whatever they want. And I think that intelligence also led to negative outcomes even when I was confined. And all of this is traumatizing because being smart in prison and being a person of color who isn't afraid to speak out means you're arrogant or you do not respect authority. And so it's this weird dystopic place where even when I had transitioned from committing assaults on people to writing grievances, uh, it was still seen through the same lens. And it's really, uh, to this day, those experiences lead me to not only, I don't find no gray area when it comes to dealing with whether it's bureaucrats or administrators in these different systems, because the trauma makes me expect some type of strange response. So I might as well just go all in. People are like, oh, you need to be more delicate. What for? I tried all that before, but that's trauma, because I'm not even giving any other people the benefit of the doubt, or being able to separate the fact that no, I'm now a law student and the director of a project for a nonprofit, and that they're probably going to deal with me a lot different than they did when I was confined. No, 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 no. I'm not even going to waste my time and try to determine whether that is going to be the outcome. Let me just go all in the way I've always been. And yeah, why call a supervisor? I'll just file a legal brief.
Can you tell me about that process of when you went from assaulting folks to going into filing grievances and like kind of making that transition from how did that come about? Like what series of events happened or what changed in your mind going from one to the other? I
I
guess
had spent so I was confined at 14, and by the time I was 24, I had spent about 7 years in solitary confinement. And so these would be like 2 years at a time to a year or 9 months, but it added up by then to about 7 years. And a guy next door to me who had gotten about a 90-year sentence when he was 16, Native American guy, he'd been locked up about 15 years by that time. And the last person in his life, his sister, had disappeared on him. His mail was being returned. The phone was going to disconnected. And yeah, we used to talk every night. And one night I said goodnight to him. And I woke up and they were banging on his door. He had killed himself. And I just realized there's only two ways this is going to end for me. It's either going to end like Baca, where I just spend all of my life in and out of solitary confinement till one day I'm like, you know what, I've had enough of this. Or I just had to find some alternative reason to keep going. And I ultimately decided I'm going to learn everything I can about this system that led me to this place, and learn every legal means to effectively advocate for myself and people like Baca while I'm here. And that's exactly what I did over the next 20 years.
did you know the level of trauma that you had at any period in did you know about adverse childhood experiences? Did you know that you may be suffering from trauma responses? Did you know that um, why did you like know why you kept going to solitary, like the
No,
reasoning? Did you ever
no.
think about it? Well, at what point did you kind of start to become aware of that, or how?
A year ago, my life, even my success, is based on trauma. I learned the law and started advocating for myself and others because I was angry. I was just as angry writing those legal briefs and guiding people through different legal processes when I was confined as I was when I was assaulting correctional officers. It all stems from the same place. It's just that before it fueled things that were dissocial, and now all of a sudden that same energy is fueling things that are pro-social. But at the end of the day, uh you can't live in a state of anger I don't know many happy people that are angry. And so it's finding a different fuel. Actually, you know what? It's putting out that fire is what trauma awareness and the type of interventions that are necessary, I believe, for a successful reentry that actually needs to be done, because there's plenty other reasons to do the work that I do outside of traumatic experiences.
I'm glad that you brought that up because that's the question that I have. So you are familiar with reentry efforts as they stand now,
I am.
correct?
I'm currently undergoing them.
So what are those?
Well, in the couple years before I was released, the Department of Corrections ratcheted up the programs that were available to me. I did cognitive behavior therapy related to identifying my thoughts and feelings so that they don't produce negative actions. Uh, I took a religious based program. All of these programs were required, by the way, in order to learn about empathy, and which I was already empathetic, but I'm just going down the list.
Yeah.
I took anger management. There was a accounting certificate that I earned. And I was also required to take substance abuse treatment. Ironically, I didn't have a substance abuse problem. Uh, and then I was released.
So where do you think we're going wrong, or there people are going wrong with the reentry efforts on the inside when people are still on the inside?
I think one thing where it's going wrong is front loading a lot of those programs. I mean, one of the programs I was required to take was Thinking for a Change, the one where you actually have to really pause and try to identify the physical sensations before trying to articulate exactly what that might mean. And then all those different steps. Uh, Given that to somebody who's been in a controlled environment for a decade or more, uh, there's nothing to really think or feel in there. It's a controlled environment and you're numb and know how to program. You know how to get through the day effectively. That was something I could have used 6 months after I got out, because I wouldn't know why I would get uncomfortable when I would be with family members.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just didn't make sense. Why do I feel like this? Uncomfortable around the people I love. Those little things, that is when a program like that would have been effective, when you're actually out in the real world and you're starting to think and feel things that you haven't dealt with in who knows how long. And just being able to hit pause and identify different ways to understand what you're going through so that you can get through it effectively. Uh,
Were those
I,
resources there for you?
uh, no. However, I didn't even know that those resources were needed because I didn't have understanding of trauma. And by the time I hit the brakes and was able to get off the trajectory that I was on when it came to starting to weekend warrior with drugs, uh, I got an incredible support network and I'm incredibly smart. And I got incredibly caring and invested people who are in this law school that I'm attending, who all stepped up when I put them on notice and was taking the steps that I needed to get my life back on track. They were there to help facilitate that. But I mean, if it was difficult for me to access those resources and I know everybody and have everything one would need to be able to try to get those type resources. It was incredibly difficult, shockingly. And I just can't see how anybody else does that. It's
Do you,
it's
what led you to know about trauma and your own trauma?
you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had
Wow.
taken the I had taken I'd had a psychological assessment done prior to my release, and they had identified all kinds of ACE factors. There was a mitigation report done that opened my eyes to everything that I actually went through my childhood, and uh, but getting the real, I had no idea that one's brain structure is actually being changed from trauma until you mentioned it. Now, I knew that not being happy or something for prolonged periods of time during one's developmental period, because that's what I was in when I was confined, the neurons might prune themselves. So whatever would be shooting that dopamine to make one feel happy or content might not be firing after not being needed for decades. But the idea that no matter what stage of development one is in, that trauma will actually restructure your brain in ways that will produce outcomes that are not beneficial to you or anyone else, I had no clue. And it's shocking that as much money is being spent in our criminal justice system, and that science is the very reason that I got out of prison based on adolescent brain development and our understanding of that our understanding of what trauma does hasn't had any impact on the system with respect to rehabilitation while one's confined and reentry after somebody's released.
So it was brought to your attention, you were tested for it, you knew about it, but it took another person that's been where you've been, another formerly incarcerated person, someone that's experienced incarceration, say it to you in a way that raised your awareness.
Not only say it to me in a way that raised my awareness, but said it when I realized that my life is getting off track very rapidly, because I think there's almost not only naivete, but everybody has been socialized into believing that housing, family, and employment are the things for a successful reentry. Well, once you pull all that off, I mean, what's the problem? I mean, I'm in law school. I got a beautiful apartment. I volunteer in my community. I mean, I'm doing every box is checked for successful reentry, but my life was still going off track. And it was that realization in real time when the information came that it was readily, I understood it completely. But I mean, there's plenty of people that are re-imprisoned. I mean, this is my first time ever getting out. I think somebody who was confined who came to this type of understanding would get it easily, because they probably don't even understand why is it I keep getting these chances and it just never works out. I had a job, I had this, I had that. That type of awareness, I think, would prime somebody prior to their release to take the types of steps necessary with respect to trying to reach out to resources, if those resources are there, in order to try to make sure that this time their reentry will be successful.
How do we say that to them? Like right now, how do we say that if this can get in the hands of people that are experiencing incarceration or experiencing reentry, how can we say it to them in a way that will make them aware or raise their awareness around why these patterns keep happening in their life, why they can do so well and then it just goes off the rails, why what is it exactly that they can do to help themselves, and just, I don't know. That's all
You
I
know
want to do
what?
here.
You know what I think? You know what I think? One thing that could not be done. One of the programs I took was called moral recognition therapy. And this program is all about teaching you that you are the cause of all your problems. It's you. It's not your teachers or parents or the community or the drug. No, it's you. You need to take ownership of your decision making. There's generations of people that have been socialized through prison programs to believe it is all their faulty decision making or hedonistic lifestyle. You need to own what you're doing. I think not giving that message and just recognizing that no, 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 you're putting the cart before the horse. The reason you're doing all of this is because of the sexual abuse you went through when you were 4, or watching your mom being beaten mercilessly repeatedly when you were 7, or being homeless from the age of 8 to 13. I find it incredible that you will see a story about a child being abused and people will be incensed and have so much empathy for those children. My God, why would anybody do something like this? 10 years later, when that same person is a defendant, all of a sudden it's as if none of that ever happened. That defendant goes to prison and is told, you need to make better choices. Don't blame all that. And it's a faulty construct that not only people are being forced through the system to adopt, but that people who seem to have been beat down by so much in life are readily willing to accept. And it's changing that concept and actually demonstrating in the same way that the science was shown to decision makers to make them understand that a 14-year-old doesn't have the same decision making as an adult, to make the people who are confined understand that your decision making as an adult is stemming in large measure to not only what you went through as a child, but what you endured prior to getting here. And we need to deal with that trauma, not the lost job you blew or the drugs you were using. We need to take it all the way back, because the foundation of all of it is you don't have a proper foundation. That foundation has cracks and holes based on trauma, and you're trying to construct a home on this. It's not going to work. There's some people who managed to, I was building a beautiful palace on top of faulty ground. And it's only through the grace of God and the fact that I was never addicted to drugs before, and all this happened to me at 40 something, that I was conscious enough to not only identify what I was going through, but take the steps necessary to effectively deal with it. But I mean, that house might have got built. No, I wouldn't have been happy in it. And so I'm taking it all the way to the ground. And I think that's exactly what needs to be done when it comes to those who are confined.
Speaking of addictions, my addiction lasted for a very long time from a very early age, and I know that it was just because of those things that you said. I didn't have a foundation. I didn't know who I was. I didn't feel good about myself. I thought poorly of myself. And when I drank, all those thoughts, negative thoughts and feelings went away for that time, right? And It's, that's what that drinking, it's the same with like the reentry efforts. It's going to sound weird. Reentry efforts, house, job, car, blah, blah, blah,
Check, check, check.
drugs, alcohol. These are physical solutions to a spiritual problem. I'm just going to say it for me, for a mental, emotional, spiritual problem that I had. And if I don't fix that and fix the way that I think about things, the way that I process things, the way that I look at the world, the way that I feel about myself, those are not physical things, right?
Yeah.
So these physical things, these material things, for me, are not going to fix these immaterial problems that I have.
No, I completely understand, because I don't feel any measure of accomplishment or success or anything else when, in spite of everything I've managed to do, not only when I was confined, but while I'm free, it's just always chasing something else. I always move the goalpost, and really, it's really just a distraction.
I feel the same exact way.
If I became a Supreme Court justice 5 years from now, I wouldn't be satisfied. I'd be like, why did I take a lifetime job? Like, I could have been president. Let me work on being president.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Let me see. One thing I'd like to say, becoming trauma informed and implementing trauma informed practices, it's not just about the people on the inside, it's the whole system. So it would be the guards, it would be the superintendents, it would be the way the policies are designed, it would be the structures, it would be the programming. Like everything would need to change. It's such a huge investment. It would just, it would take changing the entire structure of everything, and it would cost a lot of money, right? But I'll just say it here. This is how I look at it. I view myself as a person with a disability because of the trauma that I experienced as a young child. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder, ADHD, all these things that are classified as disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I believe that most people also, even though they don't want to look at themselves as disabled, I believe that most people that are in the criminal justice system, that are going to court, that are in drug courts, that are in veteran courts, that are in treatment courts, that are in jails, that are in prisons, are disabled people. I believe they're not getting their federally protected rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The system has put in so many barriers to people accessing their rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I also think that implementing trauma-informed practices within these structures will be implementing accommodations for people that have disabilities, like systematizing it. Because now, for example, if I go to court and I need accommodations, one, I don't identify myself as disabled, and I don't want to. A lot of people don't want to because it's a stigma. Two, even if I were to ask for accommodations afforded to me under my federally protected rights, I have to basically get an attorney to do that. Like, it's so hard to even ask. And then you have to give up all your private medical records. You have to submit all those, fill out a bunch of paperwork. And for people with lacking or having problems with their executive functioning skills. It's so hard to even do that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. And I think they're ironically the biggest problem with respect to actually bringing those type treatments into the system, whether it's the correctional system or the courts or anything else, is the people who are invested in prison abolition. How do you argue to people who believe the entire system needs to be dismantled and something anew birthed, that all of a sudden multi-billions of dollars should be allocated towards the very system that has caused so many harms? And, I've heard people say you can't you can't you can't reform a corrupt system by working in a corrupt system. And if that is the only prism that one is looking at this through, I think some of the biggest obstacles to bringing trauma informed treatments into a prison would be the very people who are the allies of those who are stuck inside of those prisons.
If you wanted to enter into trauma therapy right now, do you think you could find someone that you could trust to provide specific trauma therapy to you?
I actually have found someone, and so I'm fortunate in that regard, but it was not an easy endeavor. It took many, many emails and going and dealing with bots and uploading information and figuring out what's going to be covered under my insurance and finding providers. And it was really a difficult process.
Well, thank you for this interview. Before we go, I'm going to ask you one final question, and feel free to elaborate. If there's one thing that we could do to change the criminal justice system or change reentry, if there's just one thing that we could do that would have a huge impact, what do you think that would be?
Focus more, actually repurpose the funds that are being utilized while people are confined under the model of rehabilitation and focusing them on reentry. I think I would have been better off had not a penny been spent on rehabilitation when I was imprisoned, and all that money actually being spent towards helping me navigate once I was released from prison.
What does that look like? What would that look like?
I think one would be better off having a grant to go to school while he's free and learn welding than he would confined. I think being able to go and pursue education upon your release would go more towards your reintegration than getting it while you're imprisoned. And I think ultimately, I don't think you can force people to change. And if the resources were made available for those who are seeking a different path, and this isn't a judgment call. Some people are just don't even understand their trauma and why they're resistant to change. They can't even see a need to change. But at the end of the day, you can't force change on anybody. But providing the means for people to change themselves upon their release, I think that would go a lot. I think that would go a long way towards bending that recidivism curve than the status quo.
What does that look like exactly? How is that different than what's being done? How is what you're saying different than what's being done?
I don't know of any money that's spent. The Department of Corrections isn't spending any money to get people educations once they're released. I'm being supervised. Uh, I mean, there's some people who are required to take substance abuse treatment or other type of programming that mirrors that which they would undergo while they were confined. But resources, expanding resources for housing or transportation, or matter of fact, and there's a civil liberties interest involved in this, but I had suggested to the parole board when I had a violation hearing, uh, I posited why wasn't some type of mental health counseling mandated when I was released, especially given that the Affordable Care Act, everybody leaves prison with insurance. So I had insurance, but was clueless about trauma, but they know about trauma. And I wondered, I wonder why this wasn't mandated before I ever got out. And they were really hesitant and really brought to my mind the fact that that might not even be legal. Like unless your crime involves something to do with mental health, that's completely outside the scope of the type of interventions they can impose upon somebody when they're released. But everybody in that courtroom most likely has went through trauma. So the idea that the system cannot mandate some type of treatment to deal with trauma because on its face, your robbery or your drug conviction had nothing to do with trauma. It was drug related, or he was angry, or he was greedy. Until you dial it all the way back and accept the fact that, you know what, yes, I've taken a look at your background and you've experienced your ACE score is this high, and I am going to not only order restitution, I'm also going to order that you undergo some trauma interventions upon your release from confinement. Until that recognition is actually in the system, I mean, we're just scratching the surface.
Thank you. So how can people get a hold of you?
My email is JJ at Jeremiah Bourgeois Consulting. And you can feel free to get hold of me to teach me something or to learn, because there is plenty I need to learn about this world. And there is plenty that I can share given the world I came from.
Well, I hope that we can get together and have some more conversations around this topic in the future.
I look forward to it.
And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your time. I know you're a really busy man, and so I appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right.